Welcome in to Daily Faceoff Live, your go-to source for everything hockey. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
Hump Day hockey fans, welcome into Daily Faceoff Live, streaming on the Daily Faceoff YouTube, where we're looking for our inbox questions. So if you have one, drop it in with the hashtag AskDFO. The show, as always, is brought to you by Betano, the 2023 EGR Brand of the Year. And your spot, if you want to get in on some NHL action 19+, please play responsibly. I'm Yaremchuk. He is Frank Seravalli, home from Seattle. Did you see the sun once while you were there?
No, I didn't. Don't think I could see across the street. It was that cloudy and foggy. Not much to see, and 13 hours on a plane for 40 on the ground. It was a long way to go.
Long way to go. Let's start the show with a little just news and notes. We finally have coaching news in Ottawa. No, they're not making a coaching change. Jacques Martin has been named senior advisor to the coaching staff, Frank.
Interesting, because he's the only guy on the planet who has coached more Ottawa Senators games than DJ Smith.
Interesting. Very interesting stuff in Ottawa, something to keep an eye on. But let's start the show with what you were covering out in Seattle. The Board of Governors, Gary Bettman and Bill Daly, speaking to the media. Frank, we're going to talk about the best on best stuff in a little bit, but a few other things. The Sphere was confirmed. That is great. Hockey-related revenue confirmed as well. Any surprise with that?
No, I think everything kind of seems on track in terms of the salary cap next year being $87.7 million as prescribed in the CBA. As you see here, HRR hockey-related revenue is projected at $6.2 billion this year, which would be, yes, a record, an increase from last year. And so that part all kind of seems in line, at least in terms of the economic state of the game. I think there's certainly some dark clouds out there somewhere, to continue with the rain motif from Seattle with regards to the regional TV rights contracts that the league is still trying to navigate through and what that looks like. There's a real chance that the NHL actually ends up getting those rights back at the end of this season from Diamond Sports Group, which is the parent company of Bally Sports. So there's a lot happening in terms of the revenue portion of it, but for now, seems pretty healthy.
Another thing Gary Bettman said, he seemed pretty happy with how the Blackhawks handled their Corey Perry investigation, but said he wasn't sure if the player will need a conversation with him about getting back into the league. Did anything catch you by surprise there?
No, I would say that was kind of felt like the commissioner's way of saying, no, he won't. Because if he needed a conversation or clearance to get back in, he would say Corey Perry is suspended until I say so, or is unable to play until I give the green light. And I think it was really the commissioner's way of saying, yes, we approve of the way Chicago handled this investigation. Not necessarily sure that we would have done it the same way, but we're not going to be critical of the Hawks.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here with this one, but do you think Perry lands back? Is there interest anywhere?
I do think that Corey Perry comes back. I don't think it's top of mind right now for him. I think he's working through some personal issues. He mentioned in his statement mental health and alcohol abuse. He's seeing professional help. I think he has to solve that before he can get back on the ice. But I do think that when he's ready, I think his statement went a long way in terms of helping people kind of get a glimpse or an understanding of what he was feeling and maybe what happened. I think we've all been there in a spot where we might have done or said something that we probably wouldn't have if we weren't under the influence. Who among us hasn't been there? So I think there's certainly an understanding from fans, and I think teams, as they begin to learn more about the situation, will be in a spot where they could make a judgment call one way or another, whether he's a player that they'd like to have. But from an on-ice perspective, I don't think there's any question that there'd be a ton of interest.
The one thing from Bettman and Daly that grabbed the headlines, Frank, and it was your headline over at dailyfaceoff.com, the NHL expresses concern over the 2026 Winter Olympic arena delays in Milan. And I mean, I know Bill Daly's quote was, he said, "I can't say I'm pessimistic at all." Frank, as someone who has watched the NHL have to bail on multiple best on best attempts, I'm going to go ahead and say I'm pessimistic. Can you talk me off that ledge?
I mean, I can, because I think for the first time in years, like almost a decade, we're not hearing any sort of complaint or criticism with the IIHF and the International Olympic Committee in terms of paying for things that they typically should, such as insurance, travel, accommodation for players, and also their families. So it seems like they're in alignment on that front. And it kind of feels like for once, if the NHL players don't go to the Olympics, it's not going to be because of the NHL. However, I understand what you're saying. If you kind of squint hard enough, you can sort of see a ready-made excuse that was being built up as a reason for why the NHL might have to pull the plug ahead of Milan. And that is because they haven't put shovels into the ground yet on an arena to host the 2026 Winter Olympic ice hockey tournament. That's kind of problematic because, as the league pointed out, if it's not completed until the fourth quarter of 2025, well, then that only leaves you 6 to 8 weeks of wiggle room before the tournament would begin. You can't host an event to test it. You can't really work on the ice. There's a lot of things that would have to go into getting that ready in a short period of time. So then the next question becomes, well, what happens if they hit a major delay between now and then, and it does get pushed back, and it's quite clear that the tournament won't be able to be played in Milan at that site? There's some options kind of somewhat nearby. 2 hours away, there's an arena in Torino. An hour north in Switzerland, in Lugano, there's another arena that you could host this at. But then you heard the Deputy Commissioner, Bill Daly, as you mentioned, point out, well, maybe if they're not in the Olympic experience, that players might not want to go. I think this kind of opens the door for the NHL to say later on, hey, we told you so. We're ready to go. We were here. We've got the agreement, but you guys can't get your act together. I think that's something that the NHL has certainly kind of put out there for everyone to consume as you will.
What do you make of this idea of a 4-team tournament coming in a, we'll call it mini World Cup of hockey, if you will, in 2025? Because Frank, when I sit there and look at a tournament that would have Canada, USA, Sweden, Finland, I mean, let's flash up the point leaders right now in the NHL. You're going to do something and try to do a little best on best with no Kucherov, no Panarin. I know that's geopolitical and maybe a little different, but like no David Pastrnak, no Leon Draisaitl at this tournament, no Roman Josi at this tournament. It feels a little silly to me.
I think it's the best of what they can do right now. So it's not best on best, but because you're in a situation where Sweden and Finland have essentially piped up, as I've reported, and said, hey, if you're including Russia in this next World Cup of hockey or best on best tournament, then we're out. So then you take Sweden, which after the US and Canada is the third largest producer of NHL players, and take them out of the mix, and then Finland, just to add Russia, you're in a really tough spot. So the league can't include Russia. They know they can't, at least right now as the world turns. And so they're kind of left with this idea of a more or less bastardized 4-team tournament as an appetizer for the real thing at the 2026 Olympics, which again may or may not include Russia.
Listen, as a diehard supporter of Team Europe at the last World Cup of hockey, I would like it brought back.
Wouldn't you have been a fan of Team North America, considering you are not just from Canada, but you also would have fit the age scheme to play on that team?
I do own multiple pieces of Team North America apparel, and that is absolutely not a joke.
Well, it sounds exactly on brand.
Yeah, 100%. Let's get to what we saw on the ice last night in the NHL. The Kings of the Road, Frank, the Los Angeles Kings have tied an NHL record with a 10th consecutive road victory to start the season. We've talked a couple of times on this show and on the DFO Rundown about the incredible season Anze Kopitar is having. He's found the fountain of youth, and maybe Drew Doughty has as well, firing home the overtime winner in last night's victory over the Blue Jackets. And listen, beating the Blue Jackets right now, not all that impressive. Scoring 3 goals in the first 6 minutes and 48 seconds of the third period to erase a 3-goal deficit and then winning the game in OT. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. This Kings team just continues to look more and more like a legit Stanley Cup contender.
Yeah, it was the first 3-goal third period lead that was blown and ended up being a win for the opposition of the season in the entire league. So that was special. But to keep that streak going, to set the NHL record, when you size up this Kings team in general, I love watching them play because they've got just about every facet of their game dialed in. They're consistent, they compete, and more than that, they always seem to be in control, which is something that I think is so hugely important in the NHL. They're disciplined in the way that they approach things in Todd McClellan's system. It's annoying to play against. We've had John Goyens on to break it down in the coach's room. Their neutral zone forecheck and how specific it is in terms of letting the play come to them. They don't run around like chickens with their heads cut off trying to make something happen. They let it come to them and then they pounce. And that part is exciting to watch. And I can't get over the changes that they've made in net and the enormous gamble, the big bet that they placed on Cam Talbot. His numbers this season have been lights out. You look at his save percentage, how good he's been, how much they're spending on goaltending. I know we had Carter Hutton on yesterday, and he was sort of poking at the idea of, hey, maybe because you look at Phoenix Copley and how he's struggled, that they need to go out and get another guy to sort of play in tandem with Cam Talbot. I'm not there quite yet. It's an interesting side note to think about as we get closer to March 8th and the trade deadline. But for me, if you were to tell me right now that the Los Angeles Kings are the best team in the Western Conference, I'd have a hard time talking you off of that stance.
Frank, they have 10 skaters on their team with 5+ goals this season. I know you're thinking 5 goals, who cares? We're 23 games in. To have 10 guys producing at a 20-goal pace or right around there is wildly impressive. Just a quick note on McClellan. Hutton talked yesterday about the positive impact McClellan's system has on those goaltending. You talked about how they are a pain in the ass to play against. Their structure, their discipline is so good. Usually the Jack Adams Trophy comes with like a bit of a narrative, right? It's like a coach who took a team and his team just far exceeded expectations. And not that the Kings aren't far exceeding expectations, but they aren't that typical criteria for a Jack Adams coach. But I think Todd McClellan might be the best coach in the NHL right now.
He certainly deserves consideration and an entry into that conversation because he has been a huge part of what the Los Angeles Kings have accomplished. And you look at sort of the methodical build of Rob Blake and Luke Robitaille and their staff drafting and developing. It takes a coach like that to come in and then put all the pieces together in the puzzle and have them fit nicely to the point where you also get buy-in. It might be easy for someone like Anze Kopitar, who can see the big picture and is so committed defensively, to get that. But to see the rest of your team, certainly with some dynamic offensive stars, to convince them that this posture is what's going to enable this team to best achieve success, that's not easy to do. It takes someone who has experience. It takes someone who can level with his players and connect with them. And also, when you take a look at this team and where they're at moving forward, maybe the most exciting part about the Kings and their arrival as maybe the top team in the Western Conference is it's probably really sustainable. They've got guys in their lineup and further down, as you see the explosion from Quentin Byfield this season. You notice that Brant Clark is still playing in the AHL on defense. This team is not only good right now, after winning 2 Stanley Cups in the last decade, they've got a real chance to bring home multiple Stanley Cups over the next decade.
Speaking of interesting results last night, we're going to talk about the New York Islanders in a minute with Arthur Staple. But first, let's go to the flip side of this Kings matchup, Frank. Teresa over in our Daily Faceoff YouTube, hashtag AskDFO. Any hope for CBJ fans for front office changes they're clamoring for? I mean, is there any hope for Columbus Blue Jackets fans at all? Because it's a miserable existence right now. When you look at the fact they blow that lead last night, lose another game. And yeah, let's check the minute reports here for a couple of guys. Kent Johnson, 808, seems smart. David Yaremchuk, 1025. Adam Fantilli, the guy who went 3rd overall last year, 10 minutes and 11 seconds. But at least Justin Danforth played almost 20 minutes last night, Frank. What the hell's going on in Columbus? It's a mess.
Yeah, at least Adam Boqvist played almost 25 minutes. And Peak, who was minus 41 last year, he played 23. That's good. Honestly, this team is an absolute mess every which way. And Aaron Portzline so perfectly points it out in his tweet here when he says, you can't kid yourself. As much as the Blue Jackets were thinking about this year getting in the playoff mix, that where they're at in the standings and how ridiculously disappointing it's been, that they could even make a case that this season is still about this season. This team seems like it doesn't care. You mentioned miserable for fans. It looks like it's more miserable for the coaching staff listening to them talk, even though Pascal Vincent is only a quarter of the way through his first season ever behind an NHL bench. He seems like he's lost his patience. The players seem like they've had enough overall. When you look at, watch Patrick Laine shift to shift to shift in any game. Some nights you're not even entirely certain if he likes hockey. And more than that, you've got this incredible crop of young players that you've drafted well and have developed so poorly, from Sillinger to now Fantilli and Yaremchuk. And all these guys are getting a taste of all this negative energy that's floating around your team. And no one has done anything to change it. They've had a logjam on defense since training camp. And yet they're still playing the wheels off of these pieces who they couldn't give away. And then I'm at the Board of Governors meeting, and Jarmo Kekalainen in Seattle is one of the very few NHL general managers that's there for a meeting that really isn't designed for general managers. And I couldn't help but think about sort of the old Rome is burning. What exactly is he doing at this exact moment in time other than learning about the economic state of the game and AI? Dig in, bring your shovel. Where's your hard hat? Do the work. And that part is missing. So I don't understand what's happening in Columbus. It's a full-fledged 4-alarm fire that, you know, it's straight up like the meme that we see all the time on social media. It's fine, we're good, and everything else is up in flames.
I mean, he's going to learn about AI, punch into Chat GPT, how to fix the Columbus Blue Jackets.
No joke. That was actually one of the messages to the Board of Governors was get a Chat GPT subscription, $20 a month. It's well worth it.
Well, it's good to see his head's in the right spot. Blue Jackets fans, I'm sorry. I don't think it's getting much better in the near time here in
wholesale
CBJ.
Changes. That's what's needed. I said it from the second that they flubbed the Mike Babcock hiring. It should have been on Jarmo Kekalainen as the third longest tenured GM in the league, who's won exactly one playoff series. When you have a critical hire like that and you botch it that badly, time to go.
I don't think you're going to find someone in hockey circles who's going to disagree with you, Frank. All right, let's get to our big segment for the day. It is the All 32 with Arthur Staple. The All 32 is delivered by DoorDash, where for a limited time, our Canadian listeners can get 25% off and 0 delivery fees on their first order of $15 or more when you download the DoorDash app and enter the code NATION25, all caps on that, NATION25. He is a hockey columnist, the New York hockey columnist for The Athletic. A pleasure to welcome Arthur Staple into the show. What the hell happened last night? That's about as unacceptable or embarrassing as an overtime loss can get, no?
Well, if you've been watching the Islanders this year, it's pretty much par for the course. It just happened against a pretty bad team, but they've blown, I think it's now 11 third period leads out of 24 games, which is just a remarkable number. And there's so many numbers that make zero sense with this team. They're able to get leads. They're able to get multi-goal leads, and they just disappear. And last night was probably the most egregious, at least since last week when they blew a 2-goal lead in the last 8 minutes to the Devils and lost in regulation, which seemed like the worst loss of the season. So it's been a lot of worse so far, and yet still with their odd 10-7-7 record, they're still in a playoff spot. So there is some good with this team. But the bad stuff is so maddening, and the fan base has the pitchforks out for Lane Lambert right now, and it's hard to blame them. That something you'd want to have change there, and obviously, just the way that they're losing these games and losing these points is completely unacceptable.
Yeah, Arthur, you had a great story yesterday in The Athletic, just explaining the duality of this team, how some of these numbers just make your head explode trying to figure out, you know, what is this team exactly? And so you mentioned sort of that keyword change, and I always put the Islanders in the only God and Lou know category of what happens next. But if you were to size up or sort of create a hypothetical list of things that might happen, what would be at the top of your list?
I mean, if you had a GM who wasn't Lou, you'd probably look to the coach, but you know,
he's someone that's been known in his career to fire a lot of coaches.
Yeah,
he fired a division leader with a few games left in a season one time.
And certainly, right, like you said, Frank, in situations where the team is doing a lot better than the Islanders are doing right now. So I don't know that that's top of his list. I think the thing you can look at with Lou is he's always willing to go for it. You know, they haven't had a first round pick in 4 years, and I don't think at age 81 he's waiting around to see if they're going to develop any more guys. So if there's a trade to be made, you know, maybe they've been linked to Noah Hannafin, who, like you said, who could possibly know? But if that's a guy that they have interest in, um, you know, anything to shore up their defense right now, and certainly their defensive zone play. Adam Pellick has really kind of been their shutdown number one guy for the last few years. He's out for probably another 6 or 8 weeks. Even a guy like Sebastian Aho, who hasn't really been a regular in the lineup, a guy who can get the puck out of the zone and carry it out. Their transition game has been awful, and clearing the zone has been a problem. But the main issue with this roster is that it's so immovable. You know, Lou made the commitment last summer to re-up all of his guys to incredibly long-term deals. You know, the cap numbers were good on guys like Pierre Engvall and Scott Mayfield and Semyon Varlamov. But when you've got a guy like Mayfield for 6 more years after this year, and he made 2 really egregious mistakes last night that led to the last 2 goals in regulation for San Jose. When you've got a guy like that who's on the wrong side of 30, completely immovable now, a guy you could have gotten a decent haul for going as a pending UFA last year, going into the trade deadline, and retooled that bottom pair maybe. So, you know, I think the original sin of this team happened in the summer and happened with Lou. So maybe he's looking at it as, I'm not going to fire a coach to fix something that's my problem. And also, you can't really swap out a lot of these guys. Maybe he could want Noah Hannafin, but you're going to have to probably give up a guy like Alexander Romanov. And what happened 2 years ago? He gave up a first round pick to get Romanov. So they're not in a really flexible cap situation. They're not really in a flexible roster situation. It kind of is what it is with this lineup. And I think if they're trying to look at the positives and say, we're able to get these leads and we're scoring enough, a team that wasn't able to score a lot, their power play is competent now. They've got 2 pretty good goalies. And really the issue is just the last 10 to 15 minutes of regulation. Maybe they feel like it's fixable with this group. The calls are just going to get louder and louder. And we guys were talking about Columbus and how hapless they are. Guess who the Islanders play tomorrow night? It's the Blue Jackets. So maybe it's a time for Columbus to get well and have one of those comebacks of their own, because the Islanders, when they take a lead, everybody starts to hold their breath around here. And that can't be good for business and can't be good for how the team is feeling going forward.
You mentioned just how immovable some of these pieces are. Their 8 highest paid forwards, I believe, are all under contract for next season as well. Like, if Lou wanted to try and improve this roster, the fact that they don't have a ton of wiggle room, the fact that, you know, again, a lot of those guys are locked in, it would probably be pretty expensive to do so. Do you think it's a mistake for them to keep pushing their chips in with this roster, or do you see the potential in this group? I mean, they're only 2 points away from being second in their division.
Yeah, and I think they've certainly benefited from the fact that the Metro hasn't really been as advertised from the last couple of years. Carolina didn't come out of the gate strong. Pittsburgh is still, we're trying to figure them out. The Devils seem like they've taken a little step back, can't get a save. Philly has been good, but who knows if that'll sustain. Same with Washington. So the spot is there to be taken. So I think that's another reason why you don't go too crazy. But, you know, I think the thing with Lou is when he came in now 6 years ago, he fully took control of hockey operations. Scott Malkin is the principal owner. He doesn't live in New York. He doesn't live in the United States. He's not an incredibly hands-on guy. They do talk a lot, from what I understand. But he is not a guy who has been an owner for a long time, is heavily involved with what the league does. So it's not like they have a plan B if they decide that they want to move on from Lou. Maybe the situation now is they don't want Lou to make any demonstrative moves because they want to evaluate in the offseason if the season does go south. But if you decided to make a rash decision at the top and make some changes in the middle of the year, which would be very unlikely, Lou's taking all the pulling out all the wires and taking everything out of that front office. It's his son, it's Steve Pellegrini, who has really only worked for Lou in Jersey and here. And that's it really for this front office. There's nobody in waiting really. And it's the same with the coaching staff. You know, John McClain had brief head coaching experience. Doug Huda's been around. But there's nobody here that can just jump right in and take over. So it would be a big change. And I think that's probably part of the hesitation for Lou to making a coaching change, and probably major hesitation from ownership if they wanted to move on from Lou Lamoriello.
You can find him on Twitter at Stape Athletic. You can read his work over at The Athletic. Arthur, really appreciate your time today. And I love that Expos lid as well.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Moving along to our daily face-off inbox question, hashtag AskDFO. Frank, you had the tweet yesterday about Philip Broberg and the Oilers and his right to maybe go search for a new home, granting permission for him to seek a trade. What's the percentage chance Philip Broberg is moved in the next month in your eyes?
It's probably pretty decent. I'd say
Okay.
60 to 70%. I think the Oilers have acknowledged that this hasn't quite worked out. I think there's a crisis of confidence for the player. I think there's a lack of trust from now 2 different coaching staffs to put him into the lineup and to let him go. And the pressure's on for this team to make the playoffs, and to every win matters. Every game matters at this juncture of the season. They don't really have time to figure it out and say, hey, just going to let Philip Broberg develop here. That's not really the spot that they're in. And so the only real path to do that is to go somewhere else. And obviously they're actively trying to facilitate that.
You noted in your tweet that the Oilers would prefer a player over just a pick or whatever. Do you think Ken Holland and company will be successful with that? Like,
I think there's
for this
always
next
some
one?
maligned player out there somewhere. And if it's
Yeah.
not someone that's maligned, it might be someone that's in a different situation or different spot. Someone that's a vet, someone that has been around, has experience. The part about the player, though, is that the hardest part is it's going to have to be cash in, cash out. So that's really the toughest spot that the Oilers are in, is trying to make all of those things line up perfectly. It's a dance.
Let's move along to our Betano daily bets for the day. 19 plus. Please play responsibly. Tough day for me yesterday. 0 for 2 on the betting front, but I will look to bounce back this evening. Let's flash up what we got here, Gavin. Yes, the Golden Knights taking on the St. Louis Blues. And I looked at that money line price tag and I went, I really like the Golden Knights in this game here. I think they're starting to find their stride once again after a weird little blip. I like them on the puck line, plus 147. I chased the juice with the Rangers yesterday, fell flat on my face, as New York did as well. But I like going back to the well tonight, a little road favorite action with the Vegas Golden Knights and a very juicy puck line bet. My shot prop parlay, I got Jake Neighbors sitting at 1.5 in that game. Jake Neighbors has crushed this in 6 straight games. Like, he's rarely even getting 2 shots. It's 3, it's 4, it's 5 in some of these outings. So I love that. Zach Hyman has hit 7 shots on goal in 2 of his last 3 games. In his last 4 games, Frank, he has 23 shots on goal. He's hit this mark in 6 in a row. I love playing these two together. They're both on great heaters in the shots on goal department. Plus 151 is a juicy, juicy price tag as well. So a couple of nice plus money bets for me here on a Wednesday evening in the NHL, which brings us to garbage time, which is brought to you by Wendy's and the Daily Face-Off Survivor game. For those of you who dream of smoking the competition, Wendy's is rewarding you with weekly prizes like their brand new chicken strips and French toast sticks. Frank, you still alive?
Yeah, I don't want to scare anyone, but I am still alive in the Wendy's Daily Face-Off Survivor pool. There are exactly 109 of us remaining after starting the week at 826. 2 for 2 so far. Still in, and I'm going to go with the Colorado Avalanche getting a win over the Winnipeg Jets tonight. That, to me, there's some kind of tough ones to pick. I never really know how to feel about the Boston Bruins over 19.5 hits. Definitely not betting on Nick Robertson to get a point. Travis Konechny already got me once in the Daily Face-Off Survivor pool to get a goal. So I'm going to stick kind of with what I know. And I was either going to go Canucks over 4.5 goals, Sens to get a power play goal. But I think I'm just going to keep it real simple and go Avs win over the Jets.
Boston only averages 17.43 hits per 60. So I think you're smart to stay away on that one. But what do I know? I've been eliminated now. Garbage time, Frank. We talked about the LA Kings. We gave them some love. I'm knocking them down a peg. Enough of the chrome helmets. I don't like them. I am not a fan. I think that uniform setup they have with that vintage LA Kings Gretzky style logo would be so sweet and so classic if they ditched the chrome buckets. Am I being a cranky old man, or do you agree with me?
No, I think you're being a cranky old man. I like him. It's different. No one else does it. The white gloves is part of what kind of gets me sometimes when they wear those. So that part I'm a little out on, but I think you're right. Maybe there could be some part of it that's a little bit more traditional. How do you feel, though, about some teams wearing their road helmets with their home jerseys? Like, you've seen, I don't know if you've seen recently, a couple teams have switched it up and they've been wearing the opposite helmet. How do you feel about that?
I don't hate that as long as the colors don't clash too much. Like, I've always been a fan of, one, I wish the league would switch at the halfway point and the home teams would wear white for the back half just to give everyone a different look every once in a while. I also think that if the colors don't clash, both teams should be able to wear their home jerseys. Like, why can't you have the Leafs in blue against the Red Wings in red, or the Oilers in their blue against the Predators in their yellow? It would look cool. It would bring some more life to the ice.
Yeah, I'd also like to just see the NHL go back to the more traditional white means home. And I also wouldn't hate it if there was a time in the year on the schedule where it flipped and then the dark jersey was at home. So if, let's say, you only go to Oilers home games, you got to see both jerseys for a period of time in the season. The AHL actually does that.
Yep.
I think it's a real easy thing to accomplish in 2023. Also, by the way, at the Board of Governors meeting, Michael Rubin was there, chairman and CEO of Fanatics, who is the NHL's official jersey partner next year by Adidas. Incoming Fanatics. We'll see how that works out.
For jersey collectors like myself and our boy Steven Ellis, who I know is in the chat right now, that is good news because it means you're going to get some Adidas jerseys on cheap clearance deals over the next 12 months here. That is a wrap on today's edition of the show, as always brought to you by Betano. Big shout out to Arthur Staple for swinging by and giving us a few minutes as well. It's going to be myself and Colby Cohn tomorrow on the program. So Frank, you enjoy the time off and the long weekend. Me and Colby going to slap it around tomorrow at noon Eastern. Look to chat with everybody then.
Thanks for tuning in to Daily Faceoff Live. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.